Part 1. The calm before the storm. It started like any other hiking trip. My friends and I, seasoned hikers who loved exploring new trails, decided to check out a forest that was said to be a hidden gem for nature lovers. The weather was perfect that day. Clear skies, a gentle breeze, and the sound of leaves rustling in the trees. We parked our car at the trailhead, and with backpacks full of supplies, we began our journey. At first, everything was peaceful. The kind of serenity you only get when you're deep in nature, away from the noise of the world. The forest was thick with trees, their towering trunks casting long shadows across the trail. The scent of pine and earth was fresh in the air, and the ground was soft beneath our boots. We were about an hour into the hike when something began to feel off. It was subtle at first, a strange, faint noise that seemed to be drifting through the air. I stopped and glanced around, but the others kept walking ahead, assuming it was the wind. I tried to shake off the unease creeping over me, but as the sound lingered, it became clearer. A soft whistling, almost like a melody. A gentle tune, but one that seemed oddly out of place in the quiet woods. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. My friend Sarah turned around, smiling. "It's probably just a bird," she said. "There are tons of them around here." I nodded. But something about that sound didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the whistling, it was the way it seemed to follow us. At first I thought it was a bird, but then I noticed it was too consistent, too rhythmic. The sound wasn't coming from above, like birds usually do, but from somewhere deeper in the woods. As we pressed on, the trail narrowed, and the trees seemed to close in around us. The path was lined with thick underbrush, and the air grew heavier, more oppressive. The whistling continued, soft at first but growing louder, as though whoever or whatever was making it was getting closer. I glanced at my friends, but they didn't seem to hear it. They were laughing, joking about the sights they had seen on other hikes, oblivious to the tension I could feel building. I tried to shake it off, but my instincts were screaming at me to stop, to turn around, to get out of the woods. "Guys," I said, my voice a little too sharp for comfort. "Do you hear that whistling?" This time they paused, all of us standing still in the clearing. We listened. At first there was nothing. Then, as if it had been waiting for the silence, the whistle came again. Louder, clearer this time. It was a strange, haunting melody, one that seemed to echo in the empty spaces between the trees. Sarah squinted into the woods. "It's just a wind passing through the trees. It's probably an animal mimicking something." But as she spoke, the whistling came again, sharper, more deliberate. It wasn't the wind and it wasn't an animal. It felt wrong, too intentional, too clear. I was starting to feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I wanted to ignore it, to believe it was just nature playing tricks on us, but deep down I knew something was off. This wasn't right. We continued along the trail, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The whistling, now more like a distant call, followed us every step of the way. It was always there, like a shadow, always just out of reach. Every time I turned my head, it felt as though the trees were closing in tighter. We kept walking, and I started to feel the unease deep in my chest. My heart beat faster with each step, but the others, they kept laughing, kept walking ahead, oblivious to the growing discomfort gnawing at my insides. Finally, we reached a small clearing, a place where the trail split. To the right, the path continued deeper into the forest, and to the left, it led back toward the entrance. We stood there for a moment, the sound of the whistling now louder than ever. "Let's take a break," Sarah suggested, pulling out a water bottle from her pack. I was about to agree when I heard it, just to the left, beyond the trees. Footsteps. Not the soft patter of an animal, but heavy, purposeful steps, as if someone was walking toward us. I looked over at my friends, but none of them seemed to notice. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, but the others were already talking over me, distracted by the bags and snacks. I felt my stomach twist in knots. The footsteps continued, slow, deliberate. They were getting closer. I turned my head toward the woods, heart pounding. Nothing. Just trees, shadows, and the heavy silence of the forest. No wind, no sound of animals, just the steady, rhythmic steps. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel the panic rising in me. "Let's go," I said, my voice strained. "We need to get out of here, now." I don't know what it was, but something told me that whatever was out there, whatever was whistling, whatever was moving just out of sight, wasn't something we were meant to encounter. And in that moment, I had no intention of staying to find out. Part 2. Unease becomes fear. We didn't even hesitate. We gathered our things and started to head back the way we came, the sound of the whistling still haunting the air. It wasn't like the usual sounds you'd hear in the woods. There was something deliberate about it, something almost human. As we retraced our steps, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking just out of view. The woods felt different on the way back. The light, that gentle warmth of the sun filtering through the trees, now seemed dimmer, like the forest was swallowing the light. I felt a tightness in my chest, like the air had gotten thicker, heavier, as though the forest itself was trying to keep us there. Every rustle of the wind made my heart race. I glanced around, but my friends seemed oblivious, talking amongst themselves, laughing, completely unaware of the rising tension. We passed the first few trees, and I caught a glimpse of something. Something behind the trunks, a shadow moving quickly, too quickly. It didn't belong. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice tight with panic. No one stopped. No one looked. "It's just a deer," Sarah said dismissively, still ahead of me on the trail. "Come on, don't be such a baby." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, something watching us from the trees. My eyes darted around, seeking movement in the shadows, but the deeper we went, the more the forest seemed to close in. The whistling came again, almost mocking. The sound wasn't random anymore. It felt as though it was, following us. The trees, the path, it all started to look the same. We hadn't walked this far into the woods, but it felt like we had been here for hours. The trail seemed to stretch on longer than it should have, as if the woods themselves were playing tricks on our perception of time. "Guys, are we going in circles?" I asked, looking back at the trail we had just come from. But it looked different now. The trees seemed thicker, more oppressive. The ground beneath our feet felt unfamiliar. "Quit freaking out," Sarah said again, but her tone wasn't as confident this time. "It's just a forest. There's no need to panic." But her words didn't soothe me. They made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. She was trying to convince herself more than she was convincing me. The whistling stopped for a moment, leaving an unsettling silence behind. But it didn't last long. It came back, louder this time, and it was unmistakably closer, almost as if someone was just behind us now. I turned sharply, expecting to catch a glimpse of someone, maybe a hiker or local who knew the trail. But there was nothing, just trees. Dense, heavy trees that seemed to stretch toward us, closing us in further. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Suddenly, there was a snap of a twig, loud enough to make me jump. We all froze, and for a moment, everything was still. But then, there it was again. A shadow flitted past the trees, moving fast, too fast. It was out of the corner of my eye, but I saw it clearly enough. A dark figure, darting between the trunks, just beyond the edge of the clearing. I held my breath, trying to listen. The sound of the whistling came again, closer this time, and it seemed to echo in all directions. "This isn't funny anymore," I said, my voice low, almost pleading. My friends stopped. The mood had shifted, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. "Seriously, I don't think we should be here," I said, my voice trembling despite myself. "Something's wrong." The others finally noticed my distress. We were far from the trailhead now. The forest, which had been inviting when we started, now seemed suffocating, oppressive. Something was watching us. Something that didn't want us there. And then, just as I thought I couldn't stand the silence any longer, the whistling stopped. It was gone. But the tension in the air remained, thick and palpable, as if something had drawn closer and was now waiting, watching. "Let's get out," I said again, my words more urgent now. There was no hesitation in my voice. I turned and started walking faster, breaking into a near jog without even realizing it. I didn't care about the others anymore. I had to get out of those woods, away from whatever was stalking us. But as I turned my back, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not from my friends, but from somewhere behind us. Someone or something was following us. It was too close to ignore. Too real. "Guys!" I shouted, but the others were already moving ahead, their faces pale now, looking around nervously. "Keep up!" Sarah snapped, but she was no longer looking confident. She was scared too. I could see it now. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another step, we came across a small clearing. The air seemed different here still, but there in the center of the clearing was something that made my blood run cold. A pile of broken twigs, sticks arranged in a deliberate pattern, like some kind of symbol. It wasn't natural. It didn't belong. "Okay, this is too much," Sarah said, her voice shaking now. She stepped back, nearly tripping over a root in the ground. I was about to agree, but then there was that sound again, the whistling. This time louder, more insistent. It was like it was coming from right above us, as if something was perched in the trees, watching us. I turned to my friends. They were frozen, their eyes wide with terror. We all heard it. The whistling was now unmistakable. It was coming from the direction we needed to go, back toward the trailhead. And then, in the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure. It was standing just outside the clearing, at the edge of the trees, staring at us. Tall, pale, its features hidden by the shadow. I couldn't see its face, but the way it stood, unnaturally still, almost motionless, sent a shock of terror through my chest. Without warning, it stepped forward, and the whistling stopped. We turned and ran. The sound of our feet pounding the ground was the only noise in the air, but I could still hear it. The faintest echo of the whistling, drifting after us, growing quieter with every step we took. And then, just as we reached the edge of the forest, the figure, whatever it was, vanished into the shadows, and I felt it. The presence that had been following us. It was gone. I'll never forget the way it felt in those final moments. The panic, the fear. But what chills me the most is that one thing. The last thing I heard before we left that forest behind. The soft, chilling sound of someone whistling in the distance, fading slowly into the night. Part 3, the aftermath. We made it out. Barely. Our feet hit the pavement of the trailhead parking lot, and for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe again. The oppressive weight of the forest, the fear, the uncertainty, it was all left behind, or so I thought. Sarah was the first to speak, but her voice was shaky. Did we just imagine all of that? I shook my head, trying to push away the images that kept replaying in my mind. That figure, standing in the shadows, the whistling, it was all too real. "No," I said, my voice cracking. "That wasn't a figment of our imagination. Something was out there. Something wasn't right." But even as I said the words, I could feel the doubt creeping in. I wanted to believe it was just the forest playing tricks on us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us out. The silence that hung over us as we got into the car was deafening. None of us spoke much during the drive home. We were all lost in our thoughts, replaying the events in our minds. The next few days were a blur. I tried to return to normal, to convince myself that what happened was nothing more than a series of coincidences. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure standing at the edge of the clearing. I heard the whistling in my dreams. It wouldn't leave me alone. I tried to talk to Sarah about it, but she had already dismissed it. She told me it was just the stress of the hike, that we had all gotten a little paranoid. But I knew deep down that something wasn't right. The whistling, the shadows, the figure, I couldn't explain it. But there was one thing that stayed with me, that I couldn't shake. The thing that terrified me more than anything else. We were supposed to have gone back to that forest a few weeks later. We had planned a second trip, a way to prove to ourselves that nothing had really happened. But just before the trip, Sarah called me. Her voice was tight with fear. "You need to hear this," she said. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing. "What happened?" I asked, heart racing. "I've been hearing it, the whistling. It's been following me." My blood ran cold. "I thought I was going crazy," she continued, "but it's been in my apartment, in the hallway outside my window. Last night I heard it again, and then I saw it, the figure, the same one from the woods. It's been following me." I didn't know what to say. I could hear the fear in her voice, a fear I hadn't heard in her since that day in the forest. I wanted to tell her she was imagining things, that she was just getting worked up. But I knew what she was experiencing was real. I went to visit her the next day. Her apartment was quiet, eerily so. But as soon as I walked in, I felt it. The same heaviness, the same oppressive atmosphere that had hung over us in the forest. She was sitting on her couch, eyes wide, looking out the window. "I'm not crazy, am I?" she whispered, almost to herself. I sat down next to her, trying to calm her. "No, you're not crazy." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound being the occasional creak of the building settling. But then it came, that whistling sound. Faint at first, but it grew louder, like it was coming closer. We both stood up, instinctively backing toward the door. The sound was growing, echoing down the hallway. "It's here," Sarah breathed. I didn't wait. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door. As we stepped out into the hallway, the whistling stopped. The silence was deafening, but the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight, was overwhelming. We ran out of the building, heartbeats thumping in our ears. We didn't stop until we were outside, the cold night air stinging our skin. But even outside, the whistling didn't stop. It was faint, but it was there, far off in the distance, like it was waiting for us. It was like the forest hadn't let us go, like it had followed us into the real world. I've never returned to that forest. None of us have. And to this day, I can't shake the feeling that something is still out there. Something that watches and waits, hidden in the shadows. The whistling, the figure, it hasn't stopped. It's always there, just out of reach. And sometimes in the dead of night, when the wind rustles through the trees, I can hear it again. A faint, haunting whistle. Waiting, watching. Always just behind me. Part 1. A quiet escape. I needed to get away. Life had been suffocating, the noise of the world grinding away at me. So when I found a remote campsite nestled deep in a forest known for its peace and solitude, I jumped at the chance. I packed my gear, grabbed a few snacks, and made my way to the trailhead. The idea of being alone in the woods, far from anyone, was exactly what I needed. The air was fresh, the scent of pine and earth filling my lungs as I made my way down the winding path. The forest seemed endless, the trees towering above, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. There was something calming about it, a soft hush that wrapped around me. As I walked, the crunch of leaves beneath my boots was the only sound, and with each step I could feel the world's chaos slipping further away. The campsite wasn't far. Just a small clearing in the woods with a fire ring and a spot to set up my tent. As I reached it, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment, the kind that comes with being alone in nature, untouched by the rush of everyday life. I set up my camp, carefully arranging everything, knowing that I would be spending the night in complete silence. The thought of it, being alone, no one around for miles, felt like the perfect escape. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, I had everything set. A small fire crackled in the center of the clearing, the orange glow dancing on the surrounding trees. It was peaceful, serene, the kind of night you could only experience in the woods. The sky above was a deepening purple, and the stars were beginning to appear, one by one. I sat by the fire, watching the flames as they twisted and crackled. The wind had died down, leaving the forest in a strange, almost unnatural stillness. It was too quiet. Not a bird, not an animal, nothing but the soft rustling of the trees. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, out of nowhere, a soft rustling sound came from the trees just beyond the clearing. I froze, my eyes darting to the edge of the darkness where the shadows began to stretch. It was faint, but there was definitely something, or someone out there. I thought maybe it was an animal, a deer or a raccoon rummaging through the underbrush. It wasn't unusual in the woods, but the sound felt off. It wasn't the usual clattering of animals foraging. It was almost like something was moving with purpose. Slow, deliberate. I stood up, trying to see into the darkness, but all I could make out were the silhouettes of the pines, their shadows long and unnerving in the fading light. The rustling stopped, and for a moment, the forest was dead silent again. I shook my head, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. But then I heard it again, a soft, indistinct whisper. It came from behind the trees. It was so faint I couldn't make out the words, but it felt wrong, like something wasn't supposed to be there. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. It was probably just the wind. It had to be. The trees were thick here, and the wind could make the strangest sounds as it passed through. I returned to my seat by the fire, but the sense of unease didn't go away. As the night deepened, the sound continued. A faint rustling, and that whisper just beyond the edge of the firelight, as if someone or something was standing just out of reach, waiting. I told myself it was nothing, just the sounds of the forest. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I stood up and grabbed a flashlight from my bag, hoping to settle my nerves. I aimed the beam into the trees, scanning the darkness. For a moment, nothing. Then, just as I was about to lower the light, I saw it. A shadow. It was tall, moving among the trees, its form shifting as it ducked in and out of sight. I blinked, convinced it was just a trick of the light, but when I looked again, the shadow was still there. It wasn't a person, not exactly. The shape was too fluid, too unnatural. It didn't move like anything I had ever seen. It shifted, gliding between the trunks of the trees, its edges blurry and indistinct. I felt a chill creep down my spine. My heart began to race as I backed away from the fire, my feet stumbling in the dark. The whispering started again, louder this time, more insistent. I wanted to call out, to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. I felt like I was being watched, stalked by something hidden in the shadows. My breath quickened, and panic began to rise in my chest. The shadow moved closer, slowly, deliberately, and then it stopped. In the stillness, I could hear my own heartbeat, thudding in my ears. I gripped the flashlight tighter, shining it directly into the trees, but the shadow was gone. The rustling stopped. Everything was still again. Too still. I didn't know how long I stood there, but finally, the panic got the better of me. I turned and ran for the tent, not stopping until I was inside and the zipper was closed behind me. I collapsed onto the ground, heart racing, breath coming in short gasps. I lay there for hours, not able to sleep. I kept my eyes on the entrance of the tent, waiting for the shadow to return. I listened for the whispering, the rustling, but there was nothing. The forest was silent, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. I didn't know what I had seen that night, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't staying another night in that forest. Part 2, Shadows in the Dark. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay there, eyes wide open, staring at the faint outline of the tent's fabric, waiting for something to happen. But the hours passed in silence. The forest seemed to breathe, slow and steady, just like it should. But my mind kept replaying the image of that shadow, shifting, moving among the trees. By morning, the sun was up, casting a warm light across the clearing, and the world outside seemed peaceful once more. The birds were singing again, and the soft rustle of the leaves in the breeze calmed my frayed nerves. The events of the previous night felt like a bad dream, a product of my overactive imagination. I got out of the tent, stretching stiff limbs, and made myself a quick breakfast, trying to push the unsettling feeling aside. Maybe I'd just been spooked by the isolation. Everyone reacts differently to being alone in the woods. That's all it was, right? But as I stood there, eating my cereal by the fire ring, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the normal paranoia that sets in after a night spent in the woods, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up anyway. I glanced around, half expecting to see a face peering out from behind the trees, but no one was there. I quickly packed up my things, determined to leave the clearing and take a walk down the trail, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. The trail ahead was quiet, and I followed it for what felt like hours, moving deeper into the woods. The further I went, the more I tried to convince myself that nothing was wrong, that the shadow, the whispers, were all just figments of my imagination. But the further I walked, the more I felt it, the sensation that something was wrong. There was a heaviness in the air, an oppressive weight that hung over the forest. The trees, the way they stretched up and bent, seemed to close in on me. They weren't just trees anymore. They were something else, something ancient. At one point, I stopped at a small stream to rest, dipping my hands into the cold water. I could hear the sound of the current, but in the distance, faintly, was the same rustling, the same whispering. It was coming from somewhere deep in the forest. I froze. It wasn't the wind this time. It was deliberate. A voice, faint and low, as if someone was speaking from a distance, just beyond my reach. I could make out a few words, but they were too distorted, too far off to understand. My pulse quickened. I wanted to leave. I wanted to turn around and run. But the sound, soft, beckoning, was pulling me forward. I took a step toward it, almost against my will, my feet moving as though controlled by some unseen force. And then I saw it again. The shadow. It was just there, ahead of me, standing between the trees. It was tall, unnaturally tall. Its outline was blurry, its form shifting like smoke, as if it didn't belong in the world. The longer I stared, the more it seemed to stretch toward me, reaching out from the darkness. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my feet were frozen to the ground, and then it moved. The figure glided between the trees, its form blending with the shadows around it, moving as if it was part of the forest itself. My breath caught in my throat. I knew it wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person either. It was something else, something not human. I turned, the fear in me now raw and uncontained. My legs finally moved, but I wasn't fast enough. The shadow, whatever it was, moved faster than I could. It was closing in on me, the rustling sound now louder, like it was circling me, surrounding me. My heart pounded as I stumbled backward. I glanced over my shoulder, but the trees seemed to stretch on forever. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. In my panic, I tripped, falling to the ground, my hands scraping against the rough earth. I scrambled to get up, to move, but the whispering was louder now, filling my ears, drowning out the sound of my own heartbeat. I ran. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. I tore through the woods, pushing branches out of my way, my breath ragged as I tried to outrun the fear. The shadow was still there behind me, always just out of sight. I could feel its presence, like it was right on my heels. And then, when I thought I couldn't run any longer, I broke through the trees. The trailhead, my car, safety. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I threw my gear into the trunk, slammed the door, and sped away from that place, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The roads blurred as I drove, the familiar landscape around me becoming a mere backdrop to the pounding of my heart. But no matter how fast I drove, the whispering didn't stop. It followed me. It lingered at the edge of my mind like a haunting echo that wouldn't fade. By the time I reached the nearest town, the sun was setting again, casting long shadows across the streets. I didn't want to stop, didn't want to get out of the car. But I had to. I needed to call someone. Anyone. I needed to know I wasn't alone in this. I found a small diner and sat at a corner booth, trying to calm my racing thoughts. The waitress brought me coffee, but I couldn't taste it. My hands still shook. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't answer. How could I? How could I explain to her the terror I had felt? The shadow in the woods, moving like a living thing, watching me. I didn't have an answer. I didn't have an explanation. But I knew one thing for sure. I would never go back to that forest. And if I did, I'd be sure to take someone with me. Because whatever was in there, whatever had followed me, it wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Part 3. The Forest Calls. The weeks after I left that forest were a blur. I tried to return to my normal life, but it was like the forest had left something with me. An uneasy feeling, a presence that lingered in the background, always there, like a shadow of the mind that never quite faded. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see that shifting form, that smoke-like shadow, moving among the pines. I tried to push it all away. I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to revisit the fear, the terror of that night. But it seemed like the harder I tried to forget, the stronger the memories became. The whispering, the rustling of the trees, the way it moved so fluidly, too fluidly. I began to notice strange things happening. Small things at first, things that seemed insignificant but grew steadily more unsettling. I'd hear faint whispers when I was alone in my apartment, a soft sound like someone calling my name, but when I'd turn to look, no one was there. At night, I'd wake to the sound of tapping against my window, soft, persistent, like someone was trying to get in. I chalked it up to my mind playing tricks on me, a result of too much stress, too much fear. But as time went on, the occurrences became harder to dismiss, the whispers grew louder, and the tapping turned into scraping, as though something was dragging its fingers across the glass. And then there were the shadows, always just out of the corner of my eye, shifting in the dark, moving with a life of their own. I knew then that whatever I had encountered in that forest wasn't done with me. It had followed me home, and it was never going to let go. I decided to take a different approach. If I couldn't escape it, I would confront it. I returned to the town near the forest, hoping that perhaps speaking to someone who knew the land would help. Someone who understood the whispers of the trees, the ancient things that lived in the woods. I went to the local diner where I had tried to shake off the fear that night, hoping someone there might have answers. The waitress, a woman named Kathy, was there again, and when I walked in, she gave me a cautious look, almost as if she knew what I was thinking. "You're back," she said quietly as I slid into the same corner booth. Her eyes flicked to the door briefly, as though checking for someone. "I knew you'd come back here eventually. The forest has a way of calling people." I froze. "What do you mean?" Kathy leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "The thing you saw in the woods, whatever it was, it doesn't just leave, it follows. People who see it, it doesn't let them go. They think they're safe, but they're not. It comes in waves." My heart started to pound in my chest. "What is it? What's in there?" She looked around again before she spoke, as though afraid someone might be listening. "It's not something you can explain. It's old. Older than the town, older than the trees. It's like a shadow that's been there longer than memory. People call it the Watcher. Some say it's the spirit of the forest itself. Others say it's something more. Something that's lived there since before people even stepped foot in these woods." I felt the blood drain from my face as I listened to her, the words resonating with a deep primal fear that I couldn't shake. "Have you seen it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Kathy didn't answer immediately. She just stared at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I've heard it. I've felt it. It's always there, in the trees, watching." Her words hung in the air, thick and heavy. I could feel the weight of them pressing down on me. I knew she wasn't just talking about my experience. She was talking about the truth of it, about the fact that this thing, whatever it was, wasn't just some figment of imagination. It was real. It was something the forest had kept hidden, a presence older than the trees themselves. I tried to push back the growing sense of dread. What can I do? How do I get it to leave me alone? Kathy's gaze softened slightly, but there was no comfort in it. "You can't make it leave. All you can do is survive it. You're already marked, though. It won't let you go until it's had its fill. Maybe you'll be lucky. Maybe it'll forget about you for a while. But don't think you're safe. It doesn't forget." I couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls were closing in around me, like the very air was thick with something malevolent. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I paid for my coffee and left the diner without another word. My car felt like a cage as I drove back to my apartment, and when I entered the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me, something that knew exactly where I was. It was like the air had changed again, thick with the same oppressive weight I had felt in the forest. That night, the tapping returned, louder than ever, this time accompanied by a scratching sound, a dragging of nails across the glass. I turned on every light in my apartment, but it didn't help. The shadows still moved just outside my vision, growing longer and more sinister. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. The air was too thick, too heavy with the presence that had followed me out of the forest. And in the dark I heard it. The faint rustling in the distance, the soft whisper of movement. The Watcher was still there, watching, waiting. And I knew, with an unshakable certainty, that it wasn't done with me yet. Part 1. The Jogger's Routine. I never thought I would become the kind of person who ran through the woods at night. The idea seemed absurd at first. Who runs alone in the forest after dark? But after months of feeling cooped up in my apartment, staring at the same four walls, I craved something different, something that could help me break free from the endless cycle of routine. So I decided to give it a try. The forest trail near my apartment was well known. It was a popular spot for joggers and hikers during the day. It felt safe, familiar, and I had always liked the idea of running through it. By day, it was a peaceful path, lined with trees and the occasional bench where people stopped to take a break. But there was something about the trail at night, something more mysterious. The moonlight filtering through the trees gave everything a soft, ethereal glow, and the silence that hung in the air felt almost sacred. It was different from the noise of the city. I found it calming. So I started jogging there every night after work. It became my new ritual, a way to wind down and clear my mind. I loved the quiet solitude, the rhythmic sound of my feet pounding against the trail, the way the cool night air filled my lungs with each breath. The first few runs were great. I felt at peace, as if the world beyond the trees didn't exist. There was only me and the night. But as the days passed, something began to feel off. I wasn't sure if it was the loneliness of the trail or just the darkness of the forest, but I started to feel an odd unease creeping in. At first it was subtle, a faint sense that something was just beyond my line of sight, hiding in the shadows. I would glance over my shoulder occasionally, expecting to see another runner or a fellow jogger, but there was never anyone there. It didn't seem like anyone used the trail at night, and I began to realize I was always alone. The silence grew heavier with each passing run. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was suffocating. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I felt a knot forming in my stomach as I ran deeper into the woods. Every few minutes I would hear the soft rustle of leaves, the crack of a twig snapping underfoot. But when I turned around, there was nothing. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just the wind, or maybe a small animal moving through the underbrush. But something about it felt too deliberate, too intentional, as though I wasn't alone. I kept running, though, pushing the fear to the back of my mind. I was determined to finish my usual loop, to prove that the dark woods couldn't scare me. But on this particular night, as the moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow across the path, something happened that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I was nearing the midpoint of the trail, just past the old oak tree where I usually took a short break. I had started to feel the familiar prickle of being watched, a sensation that I had been trying to shake off for days now. This time, though, it felt different, more intense. I slowed my pace, scanning the woods around me. The trees, thick with shadows, seemed to move with the wind, but there was something else, something darker in those shadows. A flicker of movement, too fast to be a person, too quick to be an animal. I stopped running. For a few moments, I stood there, holding my breath, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. My heartbeat was thudding loudly in my ears, my eyes darting between the trees. And then, there it was. A flicker of movement again, only this time, I was certain it wasn't just my imagination. There were eyes. A pair of eyes staring out from behind the trunks of the trees. They were glowing faintly, like distant stars in the night sky, but much closer. Too close. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I stood staring into the darkness. I couldn't see the figure that owned those eyes. The shadows seemed to shift and stretch around them like the very forest was hiding it, keeping it just out of view. But I could feel them, those eyes, watching me. I took a step back, my legs trembling. A quiet rustling came from behind me, and I whipped around, but there was nothing. The trail behind me was empty. No one was there. The eyes blinked, slowly. The sensation was enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't explain why, but I knew that whatever was in the forest, whatever was watching me, wasn't a person. It wasn't even an animal. It was something else, something wrong. I turned and started to run again, my pace quicker now, fueled by pure panic. My heart hammered against my chest as I tried to get away from whatever was lurking in the dark, but the eyes, those eyes seemed to follow me. No matter how fast I ran, I could feel them, just behind me, waiting. I rounded the corner near the old oak tree, and for a moment I thought I had escaped whatever it was that had been watching me. But then I saw them again, those eyes just up ahead, peering out from between the trees. They were closer now, much closer. They had moved without a sound. I stopped again, my legs giving out beneath me. My breathing came in ragged gasps as I stared into the darkness, searching for any sign of what was following me. The rustling grew louder now, and I could hear the sound of footsteps, slow and steady, just behind me. I didn't wait to see who or what was behind me. I turned and ran, faster than I had ever run in my life. The sound of my footsteps was drowned out by the pounding of my heart, but I could still hear the rustling, the heavy, measured footsteps coming after me. I could feel it now. Whatever was out there, whatever was chasing me, it was real. It was coming for me. I burst through the trees and the trailhead came into view. My car, my only escape. The air felt thick with the presence behind me as I sprinted the final stretch. But when I reached my car, panting, hands shaking, and looked back at the trail, there was nothing. No eyes, no figure, just the dark, silent woods. I got in my car and locked the doors, staring at the forest through the windshield. I didn't know what I had seen, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back to that trail. Not now, not ever. Part 2, The Haunting Returns. I couldn't shake what had happened that night. The feeling of those eyes, following me through the woods, had lodged itself deep in my mind. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw them again. Those glowing eyes, watching from the darkness. I couldn't bring myself to run on the trail again, not for weeks. Every time I even thought about it, I felt that knot in my stomach tighten. I tried to go back to my usual routine, work, the gym, even visiting friends, but it was like the forest had become a part of me. The fear, the presence I had felt that night, it lingered, following me through my daily life like a shadow I couldn't escape. But one evening, about a month later, I felt restless. I hadn't run in so long, and something inside me, the part of me that craved the quiet of the forest, urged me to go back, to prove to myself that it was all in my head, that nothing had been real. The sun was starting to set when I pulled into the parking lot at the trailhead again. The forest loomed in the distance, casting long shadows across the ground. The air felt colder now, the evening chill creeping in. My heart thudded in my chest, a nervous excitement buzzing through me. I almost turned around, but I didn't. I had to do this. I had to face whatever it was that had been haunting me. I laced up my sneakers, adjusted my earbuds, and set off down the familiar path. The first few steps felt like they were weighed down with years of fear, but as I ran deeper into the woods, that familiar peace settled over me. The sounds of the forest were calming again, the rustle of the leaves, the distant calls of birds, the crunch of my feet on the trail. For a moment it felt normal, safe. But as the trail curved, the air grew heavier. The stillness returned, that oppressive quiet I remembered from the first night. My breath hitched, and I felt my heart start to race again. But this time I didn't stop. I couldn't. I pushed forward, faster, as if the motion could outrun the dread clawing at my chest. I reached the spot near the old oak tree where the path splits, and I paused, unsure of which direction to take. That's when I heard it. A soft rustling, like the movement of something large shifting in the trees. My blood ran cold. I spun around, expecting to see something, a person, a fellow jogger, but there was no one there. The rustling stopped. Silence. For a moment I thought it was just my imagination, but then I saw it. A shadow slipping between the trees at the far edge of the trail. Too fast to be a person, too fluid to be a normal animal. It moved with purpose, as though it was watching me, waiting for me to notice. I didn't stop to think. I turned and ran. My feet pounded against the dirt, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I could hear the rustling behind me again, growing louder, closer. It was following me, just like the first time. The same feeling, the same weight pressing down on me. But this time I could hear something else, a soft whispering, almost like a voice calling my name, faint but unmistakable. It was coming from all around me, swirling in the wind, impossible to pinpoint. I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. I couldn't. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning, my chest tight. I needed to get back to my car. I needed to escape. I rounded a bend in the trail, and there it was, the eyes. They were back. This time, there were more of them. Dozens scattered between the trees, glowing faintly in the dark. They blinked slowly, deliberately, and I knew they weren't just reflecting light. These eyes were alive. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The trail ahead of me seemed to stretch out into an endless, dark tunnel, and those eyes were everywhere, lining the trees, watching me from all directions. My legs moved before I could think. I sprinted faster than I ever had before, but I could still hear the rustling, still hear those footsteps, steady and close, just behind me. The whispers grew louder, more urgent now, filling the space around me. I could feel them, those eyes getting closer, pressing in on me from every side. I didn't dare look back. The world around me blurred as I ran, the trees becoming indistinct shapes in my peripheral vision. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears, drowning out all other sound. I couldn't stop. I couldn't slow down. My lungs burned, and the stitch in my side threatened to take me to my knees. But I kept running, driven by pure, frantic fear. And then, as I neared the end of the trail, the eyes blinked again. They moved closer. They were all around me now, like a dark cloud. I felt them closing in, trapping me on the trail. I didn't have time to think. I dove into the underbrush, away from the trail, hoping to lose them in the darkness. The trees were thick here, the undergrowth tangled and heavy, but I pushed through, crashing through the foliage, desperate for anything that would take me away from those eyes. I didn't know how long I ran. It felt like hours, though it was probably just minutes. But the eyes were gone. The whispers faded. I didn't stop to look around. I kept running, my body aching, my mind in a state of pure panic. The only thing that mattered was getting out of that forest. Eventually, the trees began to thin, and the sound of my footsteps on the dirt trail became the only noise I could hear. My car. I was almost there. When I reached it, I didn't stop. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove off without a second glance at the forest. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The air in the car was suffocating, but I couldn't open the windows. I couldn't risk it. As I drove away, I could feel it. The eyes were still there, watching me from the darkness. And no matter how far I drove, I knew one thing for sure. I would never ever go back to that trail. Those eyes would always be there, and they would always be watching. Part 3. The Unseen Watcher. The drive home was a blur of panic and disbelief. I had never run so fast in my life, never felt that kind of raw, primal fear that pushed me to move beyond my limits. I could still hear the whispers in my mind, still feel the burning gaze of those eyes, watching me from the darkness. But no matter how fast I drove, no matter how far I went, it felt like I was still being chased, like the presence was right behind me, never leaving. I arrived home late that night, my body exhausted but my mind racing. I hadn't been able to shake the fear, even after I'd left the woods far behind me. The echoes of the forest lingered, haunting the quiet corners of my apartment. The whispers, the glowing eyes, they felt as if they had followed me back, settling into my own space, creeping around the edges of my thoughts. The next few days were uneventful, but the unease never left me. Every time I went to bed, I felt the air grow thicker, heavier, as though something was waiting just beyond my door. I tried to convince myself it was just stress, just my nerves working overtime after that night in the forest. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just my imagination. I thought about returning to the trail again, trying to make sense of what had happened, but something told me not to. Something told me that if I went back, I wouldn't be able to escape again. The eyes, the presence, it would follow me, just like it had followed me out of the forest. But then, one evening, a week after that terrifying run, something happened that made me realize the forest wasn't finished with me yet. I had just returned from work, exhausted, my head aching from the weight of the day. I unlocked my apartment door, stepped inside, and immediately froze. The apartment was dark, but I could feel it. That oppressive weight that I had felt in the woods. It was there, in the air, lingering just out of reach. I turned on the lights, but the sensation didn't go away. In fact, it grew stronger. I walked into the living room, trying to push the creeping fear down. But then I saw it, something that sent a cold wave of dread down my spine. On the wall just above my couch was a small, faint mark. A pattern of scratches, deep and uneven, as though something had scraped across the surface. It wasn't there when I left that morning. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how it had gotten there. But I could feel it, the eyes watching me even now. I stood there, staring at the mark, trying to understand what had happened. My mind raced, connecting the dots, the shadows in the forest, the whispers, the eyes. Had they followed me here? Had they been watching me all along, waiting for the right moment to make their presence known? I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed my friend, Sarah. She was one of the few people who knew about what I had seen that night. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey!" Her voice sounded strained, almost tired. "You okay?" "I don't know," I whispered, glancing around the room. "I think it's happening again. The eyes, the whispering. I think it followed me home." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then she spoke again, her voice low. "You need to listen to me. This thing, whatever it is, it won't stop. If it followed you, if it's been in your apartment, it's not going to let you go. You need to get out of there, get away, don't go back to that forest." I felt a shiver crawl down my spine at her words. I had been hoping, praying that I could somehow outrun this thing, this presence. But now it was here, in my apartment. I wasn't safe anywhere. "I don't know what to do," I whispered. "It's not just in my head, it's real." "I know," she replied, her voice tight. "I've heard things. People around here, they've seen it too. Whatever's in that forest, it doesn't let go. Not until it's done with you." My chest tightened at the thought. I felt trapped, cornered in my own apartment, with no way out. "I'll come over," Sarah said. "I'm not going to let you deal with this alone." I thanked her, but the truth was, I wasn't sure anyone could help me. I wasn't sure anyone could save me from whatever had been following me since that night in the forest. I spent the rest of the evening sitting on the couch, unable to tear my eyes away from the scratches on the wall. The whispering grew louder in my mind, and I could feel the weight of the eyes on me, always just out of sight, always just beyond my reach. When Sarah arrived, she didn't have to say much. She could feel it too. The oppressive air, the sense that something was waiting, watching. She grabbed a few things from her bag and started going around the apartment, opening windows, lighting candles, trying to clear the space. I wasn't sure if it would help, but I didn't know what else to do. It wasn't until we were sitting in the living room trying to talk through the situation that I heard it. A soft scratching sound coming from the hallway, like nails dragging across the floor, slow and deliberate. My heart stopped in my chest. "I told you," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "It's here." I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked to the hallway. My breath caught in my throat as I looked down the corridor, the light from the living room spilling into the darkened space. And there, at the far end of the hallway, just beyond the shadows, I saw them again. The eyes, hundreds of them, glowing faintly, scattered across the hallway, peering from the edges of the darkness, watching me. I backed away, but it was too late. The air thickened, the whispers grew louder, and I could feel the presence, closing in on me from every side. The eyes weren't just in the forest anymore. They were here, in my apartment, watching me, waiting for me to turn around. And I knew, in that moment, that I would never escape them. The Watcher had found me, and it wasn't going anywhere. The stories you've heard tonight are more than just echoes from the past. They are the whispers of things that linger, things that refuse to stay hidden. In the quiet corners of the woods, there are shadows that don't belong to any living creature. There are eyes that watch when you think no one is around. There are things waiting for you, and maybe, just maybe, you can feel them too. Perhaps you've walked in a forest before, the trees bending over you like guardians of some ancient secret, the wind rustling the leaves in a language you couldn't understand. But now, the next time you step into the quiet of the woods, you'll remember these stories. You'll feel the air grow colder, hear the whispers on the wind, and maybe, just maybe, you'll glance over your shoulder to see if anyone or something is there. Is it real? Or is it just the darkness playing tricks on your mind? The truth is, these forests, these woods, they remember. They remember those who entered, those who dared to wander too far, and those who never returned. And sometimes, just sometimes, when you're alone, you might hear the faintest sound in the distance. A whistle, a rustle, a whisper. It could be the wind, or it could be something else, something older than time, waiting. The eyes are always watching, and the woods, they are never truly silent.